Hello and welcome to this week's edition of Politics Today, and in this programme today we'll be asking how can young Christians make a stand for Christ in our post-Christian society. So join me in today's programme. I'm joined by Rebeka Moffett from Christian Concern, together with Pastor Regan King from the Angel Church. So it's great to have you both on the programme. Rebeka, thank you for agreeing to be on this programme at such short notice.
Thank
really
you.
Appreciate that. And of course the excellent work you do for Christian Concern. And it's interesting that we got Regan on today's programme, particularly because this is where Regan's first started on this programme, has progressed to our mornings and behind the headlines. So this is where our friendship and work has developed when he was working for you guys at Christian Concern. So I'm going to ask you kind of the inside info on what was Regan like to work with.
Well, the funny thing is, I think we crossed over maybe like
passing the night.
Pretty much. I think there was maybe 4 weeks that we worked together.
That was it.
And but I thought he was lovely. You were writing a book at the time, if I remember correctly.
Yes, I completed it, and I think just as I was leaving. So Andrea should have a copy in her office.
I think she does.
So
yeah,
a copy of it.
It's up there.
But we did a program with Ben from Christian Concern as well on that dealt with the issues raised. How basically to live faithfully as millennials in this complicated society, which is somewhat what we're talking about today, I think.
Absolutely. And Rebeka, knowing the work that you do and the difference, I think, between Christian Concern and so many other Christian organisations is that you are directly confronting the issues that are affecting Christians today, but you are literally confronting the media, you're confronting our politicians and making that brave and courageous stand for Christ in what is now a post-Christian society. So share with us the challenges of your generation to stand up for Christ in this generation and to witness for your faith in a society that is very post-Christian, and your age and younger have almost taken on almost hostile attitude towards Christians.
Yeah, I think there is quite a hostile attitude towards Christians. I think that's definitely one of the main challenges that we face. I think I read a headline today that said there are only 6% of adults now that identify as practicing evangelical Christians, which for me is just crazy. And actually, if you sort of double down on those statistics, it's the older generations that would profess more to be Christian. Those are the ones sort of speaking out and getting involved. So there is a real challenge for my generation and younger. I think we're quite often looked at in terms of, well, they're not Christian, they're not interested, and there's this big one of the main challenges, I would say, is this big push on identity. There's this saying in society, just be who you want to be who you are, you do you. And that, countering that with the gospel, because it's actually not about being who you want to be, it's being who God says you are. So that's a big challenge, actually. How do you counter that narrative in society with the gospel?
And Regan, as a pastor, what are the challenges you face being a millennial and not only preaching to people that are older than you, but also your courage and brave stance for Christ, particularly when you went against convention, against the COVID-19 kind of lockdowns, and decided that you're going to have a baptism service which got you in across virtually every newspaper in the country.
It was interesting because I remember you texted me shortly thereafter saying, I thought, hey, that looks like Regan, and sure enough it was.
In the Daily Mail.
So here's the thing, compassion love for God, love for your neighbor. That's really what we need to prioritize. And one of the things that you will be accused of, and just a challenge to those who may be watching, who you're in that millennial generation or even younger perhaps, you may be accused of being headstrong. You may do things out of faithfulness that some will look at and say, oh, that's just pride. I had one individual say, I think this is mostly rooted in a spirit of pride, that you're doing this. And I would say, okay, maybe to a degree, but pride in the Lord, pride in the God of my salvation, who's given me hope that enables me to know that, yes, I'm taking a risk, but I'm taking it for His glory. So, there was definitely no sense of desire for self-promotion, which is another thing that you're going to have. And that's every time you have another generation coming up and there's some attention or something, historically you can look back, the older generations often have that attitude, and they can have that attitude that this is just, some young up-and-comers trying to make a point and not doing it well. But my prayer is that compassion and that a sense of Holy Spirit-led initiative is what's there. This is not, in pastoring, it's not about preaching at people, it's about proclaiming the glory of God, not telling people what to think, but how to think, explaining why it is that this matters, why it is that we should consider Christianity. And by God's grace, I'm seeing at the Angel Church, God is working. We've seen in the past couple of years 35 different individuals baptized, and that compares with, that may seem small to some, but that compares with about 5 in the years preceding, in the 10 years or so preceding. So we're seeing God move. Many of these are in that age category of millennial up to even the 50s. So we praise God for that and know that He blesses those and honors those who honor Him.
Rebeka, one issue that seems to affect your generation and the generation younger is the whole issue of anxiety and kind of mental health issues. Growing up, it wasn't such a big thing as it is now, and this is constantly pressure from social media, from culture, from our mainstream media, and also our political establishment. But is it any wonder when your generation and younger, Christ has been taken out of the picture? And it's like, well, you're just a product of evolution. Your life doesn't matter. Your life has no meaning. You came from monkeys, and there is no God, there is no hope, there is no future. So explain the challenges facing your generation concerning the issues of mental health and anxiety that go with this lack of understanding and appreciation that we're all made in the image of God and that God has a special plan for each of our lives if we only surrender it to Him.
I think you've hit the nail on the head there. I think when we take Christ out of the picture, what do you get left with? You get left with nothing. You get left with no hope, with no future. And of course, that's going to end up with a lot of anxious people, with a lot of people who are thinking, well, who am I? And so actually there's a huge pressure, particularly on our generation, I think, to have the answer yourself. You must create your character almost. And although God has made us as creative people, we are not the creator. And actually we are who He says we are. And I think that is the main thing that we are missing in this generation. I think Regan also hit the nail on the head. It's all about compassion. Rather than compassion, we're seeing a lot of fear in our generation. There's a fear to speak out. There's fear, if somebody says something, there sort of all truth is relative. So if you challenge that truth for a person, you're going to be offending them. There's a complete fear of offense, because if you say to someone, well, that's not true, you're essentially saying, well, you're not who you say you are. And therefore you've just completely crashed down on their identity. That's the main issue. So when you're taking God out of the picture, you've got this whole identity issue that that isn't, it's just not God. It's not who God says we are, it's who we say we are. And when that becomes the main purpose or the main, our main being, our main source of life, you're going to create all of these problems, anxiety, fear, depression, whatever, because God's not in the picture. Now, that's not to say that Christians aren't going to struggle with these things as well, because obviously we do. And I think actually the lockdown probably contributed quite a lot as well, because suddenly we're on our own, and how do we cope with that? We don't have church community around us. Fellowship is so important as well. I think quite often with our generation, it's all or nothing. You know, we're in it on our own. You define who you are. It's not about community, and I think that's what the older generations have got the hang of more.
Do you think, Rebeka, that there's some element of the crises that we're experiencing at the moment? You know, cost of living is a big issue. It's a big burden to people. You know, needing, especially in the city we live in around London, you know, housing is soaring and stuff. Do you think that we've become so distracted by this tough environment that for many it's a case of, well, let me get myself fixed and sorted and well-founded first. I'm young enough that I can consider that in the future. Do you think that might play into some people's psyche on this?
Yes, I do. In short, I think there's a massive sort of materialistic pressure on people, although I think actually, being honest, that probably comes from the older generations, to be honest, because you've got these older generations who've been able to buy their own property, who've been able to provide for their family, and suddenly you're getting people my age and younger, well, we'd love to buy our own house, but prices are soaring and it's just maybe not realistic.
But there's a weight of expectation.
Exactly, it is that weight of expectation and not being able to reach it. So what do you do with that? And again, that's going to cause a whole amount of problems like anxiety, fear, all of that as well. So I really do think that plays into it.
And Regan, I mean, what we're seeing a lot in our culture now is this whole concept of this is my truth, this is your truth, that is all based on emotions and feelings, and facts go out the window. And so almost becoming a less kind of rational society, less kind of thinking society, and the emotions and feelings trump truth. Because someone said, well, this is my truth, so I hold this view, even though the science and the evidence won't back it up. Isn't there a great danger then also that this whole concept of there's no absolute truth and that everyone has their own interpretation of the truth of what's right is an indication of this being a big social issue and a problem within your generation?
Absolutely, Simon. And this was one of the core issues I dealt with in that book that Rebeka mentioned, hashtag TBH, Basic Challenges to Millennials Who Can't Even, which we dealt with. Truth is objective. It is objective. There's no such thing as my truth. There's no such thing as your truth. There is such thing as the truth. And my truth may be the truth. It may be what I believe to be true may be the truth. What you believe to be true may be the truth. But what you think is true is not necessarily what is true. What I think is true is not necessarily what is true. Truth is objective, it is concrete, it is unchanging across time and space. And we have to understand that. But now we're living in this fantasy world where you really address that quite well, Rebeka, identity. We're in a world of identity crises. People, we don't know who we are. We don't know what we are. We can't even get the most basic foundation blocks of humanity right. And that's because we've decided it's acceptable to start accepting different truth narratives when those truth narratives they have no rooting in reality. They're rooted in feeling.
Doesn't know what a woman is.
Exactly. What is a woman? All of that. So, you know, there's biological realities. You can go back only about 25, 30 years. My wife and I were watching Kindergarten Cop, and the kids there, they have some words to say that would be considered a bit politically incorrect regarding the identity and differences between male and female. We're in a day and age where we can't get even the most basic things right because it's about what we feel, not what's real. But it's not really. Truth is always about what's real, not what we feel. And that's why even when it comes to the loneliness and mental health crises and stuff, it's so important to identify the cause, the catalyst behind all of these things. A lot of it is rooted in subjective feelings and feeling dissatisfied with our conclusions that come as a result of those subjective feelings. When Jesus says, I am the truth, I am the way, the truth, and the life, no one comes to the Father except through me. Later on he says, you will know the truth and the truth will set you free. All truth is found in our Creator. In Ecclesiastes, Solomon goes through this cycle of trying to find identity, meaning, and purpose and joy in life. And at the end of it all, he says, it's all vanity, it's all futility, everything, materialism, consumerism, all of it, it's all futile. This is what matters. Fear God and keep His commandments. Remember your Creator in the days of your youth, before you get old and before bitterness takes hold and before, like Solomon, you find yourself just angry at the world and life in general.
Absolutely.
That's it though, like you said before as well. It's all about compassion as well. Yeah. Truth and compassion go hand in hand.
Absolutely.
We speak the truth in love. And actually we realize that it is loving to speak truth as well. They must always be accompanied. Truth is not relative, as you say. Truth is objective, but it's loving to speak the truth.
Truth is not a rod to beat someone with.
Absolutely.
Truth is a balm to heal people with. And that's why over the years I've realized, even in my own personal communication with people, when I encounter things that are not true, don't be threatened by them. Don't be threatened by something that you know is not true. Engage with it. Speak with it. Look at the example of Jesus. Look at the example of the apostles. They reason with. Reason. Do it in a calm, considerate manner that always brings it back to the truth, Jesus Christ.
Amen. Also, Rebeka, how much would you say that the kind of progressive left has actually dominated and hijacked the values of your generation as well? And to go against that tide is almost like a tidal wave.
It can feel like a tidal wave, certainly. It's definitely come in. I mean, it's in our schools, it's in our universities, it's predominantly those sort of ideas and ideologies are what is being taught, and more so as we go on. You've got in schools LGBT ideology coming in. You've got all of the stuff about identity, like you mentioned before. There's evolution is being taught as fact. In religious education as well, it's, you've sort of got the bare bones of here's what some Christians believe, but not all of them believe this. Where is the church in all of this? That's my question. Of course, all of these ideologies are coming in because they're being taught from such a young age. And so as you get through the generations, that's going to be the residing ideology, basically, because that's what you get from day zero, almost. The church, I think, really needs to be the answer, and we're just not seeing it. You've got sort of numbers declining in churches generally. I mean, you've got some churches that are taking off, which is great, but if you look at the Church of England, for example, numbers are declining. People are not necessarily speaking the truth in love, and I think there is this culture of fear which says, well, we must not offend because the left will brand you phobic of some sort.
Do you think that the decline in many churches is actually, in some cases, maybe many cases, linked to the removal of truth, and therein the removal of any relevancy of the gospel message?
Yeah, I think the two are probably very much intertwined. To be honest, I think you can almost date it. To be honest, I think it was when the abortion law came in. That's when we really start to see the decline of the church, because you're letting in lies. There's this lie predominantly of, well, life doesn't really matter. You can do what you want with life, and that's where it all stems from, I think. From there you get sort of sexual liberalization. Can't say that word. And it goes on. And the wider you open the gates, the more you're opening this ideology up.
Regan, you and I are kind of big movie buffs and have conversations either about football or about films. We share the same kind of interest, but hasn't there been a very tragic move which actually relates to what's happening in our society, which is a fundamental attack on masculinity and hero figures. Masculine hero figures are being massively kind of assassinated in Hollywood films.
Yeah.
And there's this kind of...
Literally.
Yeah, well, literally, we take James Bond, literally assassinated. But literally taking that role, and we're seeing the power of liberal progressives being promoted as the heroes of the day. We're actually seeing kind of women as the heroes, being macho, being able to take on men, and we're seeing this downplaying of the strong white male as being reduced to being irrelevant. Are we seeing this culturally that's also having a direct political impact as well, particularly for young millennials and younger, when actually having any role models? I mean, I grew up in the era of the 1980s. We had Harrison Ford in Star Wars and Indiana Jones. We had all these kind of this is what I grew up with, these very strong masculine role models that you looked up to. But who can you look up to today?
Well, it's a very good question. Remember that there's two things here when it comes to media and film. Not only will film influence culture, but it will be influenced by culture. So a lot of the media that we have, the changes which you speak, are assessing the noise that's out there and saying, okay, what is it that we think people want? And they're adapting to that. The problem is they're listening to the loudest voices, not even the majority voice, but so they're listening to the loudest voices that can be, quite shrill and can say, okay, we want this, we want this, we want this, and they're adapting, but people aren't going to see those films in the same numbers, which is why we have a crisis with many cinemas struggling to make ends meet. This is before COVID. I was actually grateful that my local cinema slashed its prices in about half, but the flip side of that is they had to do that because no one was going to see the movies anymore. We have, at the same time as they're adapting to those loud voices, and they're giving in to those cries for, it's used under terminology of representation and whatnot, which to a degree is fair. In some cases that's right, in some cases that's fair enough, but in other cases it takes a very definite politically, a political agenda that seeks to enforce certain moral views on those who are viewing. So then you have the majority who didn't really want this sort of movie or film, gradually influenced by the messaging that they're being given because of the minority of loud voices that are out there. And that's why we have now, I think, an even greater degree of this spiraling. I can't tell you, I've been, a few years ago, I was going quite regularly to the movies, but now it holds very little interest because I'm seeing this trajectory that every time I go, I come away disappointed with the portrayal. I did go see the recent Batman film. Many people loved it. I found that there were some points that I found disappointing, as I felt it was going this same trajectory where heroes are now portrayed as actually not necessarily heroic. They're really bad guys.
Flawed characters.
Yeah.
How do you deal with, obviously we're all white here,
right.
But when I assume possibly in your church you come across people who go, well actually no, I don't feel particularly represented, there's not enough ethnic minority or black people in movies. Obviously we're in a multicultural nation.
I think in some cases, like I said, that the call for representation is fair enough in a multicultural environment. No issue with that, the primary issue is when you have extreme minority voices saying, okay, we have an entitlement to this, and that this is across groups, not necessarily ethnic, saying we want this portrayed like this. And so you can look at Doctor Who, you can look at its trajectory and where it's been going. I've never really been a fan of the Doctor or watched much of it, but I can assure you I'm not getting into it now. And this is just because there's a general trajectory of I think entitlement sometimes that can come up, wherein you have various demographics. Again, I'm not thinking primarily ethnic here, that are looking at representation or for representation when actually, it's just not as big a thing as...
It's more just a culture of who shouts loudest wins.
That's right, that's right.
But Rebeka, I mean, and also to you as Regan as well, how important are role models? Particularly when it comes to kind of Christian role models in society, someone that a younger generation can look up to and say, here's someone who's standing against the tide. I mean, me personally, I've always gone against the tide. I actually enjoy going against the whole minority of the crowd, so it's not something I find difficult. But I know a lot of pressures are a lot of people then to actually conform and do that because they find it very difficult. So how do we kind of, my generation and older, support both your generation and the work that you both do in standing for Christ in a society that is sadly kind of post-Christian and is getting worse, it's becoming more anti-Christian as we progress?
I think role models are important, but I also think we've got to realise that people are flawed. And so you're never going to get the perfect role model. The only perfect role model for a life is Jesus. And actually, he's man and God at the same time. So yes, as much as we try to emulate Jesus, there's also certain things that he did that we're not going to be able to do. It's not our job to go and die on a cross. And, we're not going to be that sacrifice because Jesus did that. But yes, we do try to, he should be our number one role model, right? He should be the person that we're looking at. How important is it that we're looking at other people? I would say important. You want your leaders in church to be setting the way, to be giving you the example, to be encouraging you to get involved where you can in various things. Obviously, at Christian Concern, we'd say get involved in politics, get involved in Christian freedoms, get your church involved, get involved in local council, for example. I think all of these are important, and it's helpful to have role models that are doing these things already and sort of setting the way. But it is also having realistic expectations and seeing that actually people are flawed. And you're seeing that more and more with, these big church leaders who are stepping down because of whatever reason. They've got involved in something bad. And, that's the reality. People sin, people are flawed. Don't make people the be all and end all.
So Rebeka and Regan, thank you so much for being my guests on this week's Politics Day. It went very fast, and I just want to thank you for watching this programme today. I think if you're a millennial or younger, look to Jesus as your role model and be brave and courageous in proclaiming the truth that Jesus is the only way. He is the light, and only in him can we have peace in this troubled world. So I want to thank you for watching this week's Politics Today.